Hello everyone, welcome to Middle Fantasy. I am your host Zach, and today we're going to be talking again about the Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. Today we're going to be talking about what to expect from the series for people that are thinking about getting into it, and really should they start it because the third book isn't out, or is it even worse starting an incomplete series? Well, we're going to explore it, we're going to dissect it, and we're going to talk about the pros, the cons, and a reading order, and I'm really excited to talk about this because the Kingkiller Chronicles is still one of my favorite series of all time. I read it once a year. I think I'm on my 10th to 15th reread. I always forget because I'll either switch between reading it and listening to it, and we'll get into why both of them are very valid reasons to, get into the series and why there's pros and cons to them. But we're mainly going to be talking about what to expect from the series for someone that hasn't necessarily read it. But don't worry, I'm not going to be spoiling the books. We're going to be talking about it as spoiler-free as possible for people that haven't had a chance to read the books. And before I get those comments down below, we'll talk about the elephant in the room. Wait, you'll get your turn. But I am so excited to talk about this, so why don't we get into it? So the Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss is supposed to be comprised of 3 books, 1 short story, and 1 novella. Now, when it comes to it, the whole plot of the story is we follow Coat, who is a simple innkeeper, who turns out to be a legendary warrior, magician, musician. Basically, he is the quintessential folk hero of this world, and he pretty much just lives in a bar. He owns the Waystone Inn, and one day someone recognizes him and he's basically, tell me your story. If you don't, I will tell everyone that you're here. And it's more of a story about him telling his life story, how he came from being the humble, traveling, theatrical person to ending up being a person that apparently is a king killer, and how he ends up even in the Waystone Inn in the middle of noir. But what I love about the plot narrative is that it's split up into 2 ways, the future and the past. When it comes to Quoth telling a story, it's more of an interesting in the past tense while we're in the future, the tense of the end. So much like a good story, sometimes it gets interrupted. You switch between the past and the present, and I really do enjoy that. And if you like stories like this, same as with when it comes to Robin Hobb's The Farseer trilogy, you'll really enjoy this story because it switches between 2 different perspectives. And for me, I really like that, and it doesn't get boggled down by the narrative. We should start first with the pros when it comes to the story. For me, the pros is actually the pros. Yeah, think about that for a second. But when it comes to the pros, they are so beautiful. I think how Patrick Rothfuss writes his words, he's one of the best wordsmiths ever. He pretty much just writes poetry in narrative form because every sentence of this has something beautiful. It either has a wise saying or it has something so melancholy, but in the end of the day, it still adds to the narrative. Man, he's like the master of that, as well as the world building. I love the world building in this world, from the magic system down to the currency. Oh my god, does Patrick Rothfuss go into detail with everything, even government stuff? He goes really well. So if you're looking for a book that has super duper strong world building, you'll really love this world, as well as when it comes to it, the characters. We'll talk about it. Patrick Rothfuss writes some of the most beautiful, sad characters ever, and a lot of them are all different. You'll remember every single one of them by the end of the story. You'll know their names and who they are, compared to a lot of fantasy where you're thrown like a bunch of names and you're just like, okay, who's this person? You might have like, oh, that's the blacksmith, that's the magician, that's the mage. Whereas here, his characters are so weirdly unique that by the end of the story, you'll remember them because each one feels like a living, breathing person in many ways. And without spoiling it, some of them do get novellas, and some of them you just want to know more about them. And it's one of those where you go back and you reread and think about them. And for me, it's one of my favorite things about the story. And the last thing I'll talk about is the narrative and the storytelling. This is a book that's really good for rereads because when it comes to it, there's a mystery and how it, it's strung together between, the past and the present. It really does work really well when it comes to this book, is how, it's a story about telling stories, and you learn about kind of the inklings of what happens for a simple thing turns into a big mythological thing when people recount the story. For me, it's something that I absolutely love about this, especially when it comes to there's a lot of danger, there's still a lot of magic, and even in the end of the day, it's always a story that when you reread things, you'll catch things, and that's something that I love about it. Is this is a book that, again, I said, great for rereads, because you might read it the first time, but then once you read the second book and you go back to the first book, things start to make more sense. It's a book that, we haven't gotten the third book yet, but every time that you reread the books, you understand, you pick up new things, and this is like a great thing for speculation. This is why I love the Kingkiller community so much. So if you're looking for a book series that you can speculate and put up like a conspiracy board, this is the series for you. Now we'll talk about the cons. Oh man, I think the biggest con of this book, and this might be controversial, but I hate the main character. If you're looking for a book series where the main character is the absolute worst and he's kind of a jerk, this might not be the series for you, because when it comes to Quoth, I want to say if he wasn't the main character, you would absolutely hate him in the narrative, but because he's the main character, you have to like him in your brain. Like, your brain's like, okay, I'm following this person, so obviously you must like him. No, so if you have a hard time following a character that in any other sense is insufferable, you might have an interesting and unique experience with this book. I think what really makes this book is the other side characters, and kind of how you want to know how he ends up, being sad and pathetic the way that he is right now, but it's all about the characters, and you wonder more about, okay, what happens to these people in the future rather than what happens to Coat. Yeah, Coat and Quoth are really interesting at times, but it's their personalities that's kind of stink, and for me, if you're not used to like insufferable characters, you might have a hard time. Another thing that I don't like about this book series, if you're looking at it and you're thinking about getting into it, is some parts of it seem like they go on a little too long. Like, there's some times where it feels like the wheels are spinning quite around. This is something that I've heard quite a lot from people, is there's certain moments in the series that seem like a standstill. Personally, the first time that I read it, I didn't notice it. The second time, didn't notice it. And by the third time, like, okay, I can see where people are coming from. For certain moments, especially in The Name of the Wind, there are certain parts that go on for 200, 300 pages, and you feel like nothing's getting accomplished. And is that one part, is this supposed to be a mystery, or is this another part of, Quoth is just spinning his wheels, and that's what you're supposed to feel like a little bit, as his entire life has come to a halt, same as how you as the reader's life has come to a halt while reading this. So if you're looking for a book that, has some strong beginning, a middle, and an end, and then kind of getting to those parts, the wheels are spinning a little bit, there's a hard time with that. So just be aware of that. And lastly, we'll talk about the biggest thing. And I really don't want to bring this up, but again, this is one of the books they keep joking about. The third book is not out, and this is something like I'll go on record in saying that I'm, one of those people, I'm willing to wait, because the first two books are so good. It's just one of those things, like it's almost been 10 years since The Wise Man's Sphere. I think it's next year. Ew. But, when you get down to it, it's one of these series that you have to go in already knowing that the book series is incomplete. But I'm looking at this less of a con and more of a pro, because you have to think of it this way, and that is, the first book is so strong, the second book is just as strong, that I'm kind of content in many ways. Yes, I'd love the third book if I could have it right now. And a lot of the mysteries are kind of hung in the air, and we don't know when the next book will be coming out, so that's something you have to keep in mind. And this is something you have to go in actively thinking about, really, is, do you want to pursue a book that's over 1,000 pages long? And that's something you have to think about. Like, do you want a book series that right now is very satisfying, and then once you're done, you can really pour into the community and really talk about it and speculate and, really have that adventure? Or do you want it to be more of a soured experience? We're going to keep waiting and waiting and waiting until the last book comes out. And even then, Patrick Rothfuss has talked about how he wants to write more books. There's other books that he wants to write, and, controversy or not, for me, they're worth reading because they're an interesting adventure about telling stories, and also with kind of an interesting way to look at the hero's journey in many ways. And for me, I absolutely love it. Yeah, Doors of Stone isn't out. Am I sad about it? I mean, After a while, yes, but also at the exact same time, Doors of Stone will eventually come out because that's, you gotta be optimistic. If not, don't know what to tell you all about that. But that's, for me, that's like the biggest drawback that people don't want to read the series, is because the third book isn't out. You can still enjoy The Name of the Wind, The Wise Man's Fear, The Slow Regard of Silent Things, The Lightning Tree, or for some reason, if you can find a copy of How Old Holly Came to Be, or I haven't even read it, so I don't even know what it's called. I think the next thing we're going to talk about is the reading order and how you're supposed to read these books. For me, my reading order has always been The Name of the Wind, then you read The Wise Man's Fear, and then you go into The Slow Regard of Silent Things, and then you read The Lightning Tree. And that's kind of where you should go in this, because for me, I mean, you're supposed to read The Slow Regard of Silent Things between, I think, half of book 2. Like, it's really ambiguous where it's supposed to be, but that's why I leave it at the end. Or you can read it when you want to read it, but for me, it's one of those where I recommend this order because you should go by publication a little bit, even though I think The Lightning Tree came out before The Slow Regard of Silent Things. But for me, it really works. It really sets up the world with like miscellaneous characters and really just enjoying the experience. And that's, for me, one of my favorite things. There is a weird short story that's in this universe, and that is called How Old Holly Came to Be. That's also in canon, so if you're looking for more Kingkiller content, you should do that and go there. And now the last question is what's the best way to read it? Because this is an interesting question, because for me, normally I'm all for books, but the audiobook version of this is just as good, and it actually fits more into the whole narrative because it's the guy telling the story, so hearing it through someone reading it to you is just as fine. And there's pros and cons between both of them. When it comes to the audiobook, it's actually read by 2 people. The first one is actually read by Nick Podell, and this one's really, really good. It's like the American version, and he has a lot of different voices, and he does a lot of different accents, especially when it comes to characters. And then there's another one that is read by like a British guy, so if you want 2 different flavors, that's what you'll get. And I haven't actually listened to it, but I keep hearing about it, and they're very much like apples and oranges in many ways. But here's the thing is, you can do it that way, and you're going to experience the story kind of in the way that you would get if you were a chronicler. But if you read the book, this is where it gets weird. There's a benefit to reading it because there's a lot of different things when it comes to the literary devices that Patrick Rothfuss uses. Like, what I mean by this is he'll use 7 words, he'll use puns, he'll use different like turns of phrases. So in the end of the day, it's kind of one of those things like, do you want to have a fun game where the author's trying to trick you, and if you are, I don't want to say smart, but if you're clever enough, you'll notice like this word seems like it's misspelt, or it's maybe has a different meaning. Probably you're right, and you wouldn't get that through the audiobook, but at the exact same time, when it comes to the audiobook, you're getting a different experience from it where you're hearing Quoth telling the story the same way as you're in the Waystone Inn. And that's kind of the hard thing, is like 50-50 on this. And for me, I absolutely love this so much. Either way, it's a fun read. The whole series is fun. I think some of my favorite moments of any book ever actually can be found within The Name of the Wind, The Wise Man's Fear. And The Slow Regard of Silent Things is one of my favorite novellas of all time. It's weird, it's mysterious, and in the end, it's very thought-provoking. Well, everyone, thank you all so much for watching this video. This was an interesting one to do. Thank you all so much for watching this. What do you think about the series? Have you read it? How many rereads have you done? What are your favorite characters? Without giving spoilers, please. Well, everyone, thank you all so much for watching this video. If you liked it, maybe consider subscribing down below. Giving it a like would help me in the comments and the algorithms and the bleeps and the bloops. I'd really appreciate that. Well, everyone, thank you all so much. And like always, may your food and drink ever be tasteful. May your books be filled with fantasy and adventure. Bye, everyone. See ya.